Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today. I'm Courtney Davis, Hub's National Education Practice Leader, and today is our session on Rapid Fire Briefing, Mid-Year Risk Pulse, Top Risk-Facing Educational Institutions. A couple quick housekeeping items before we kick things off today. First, this session is being recorded, and we'll send you a link afterwards so you can revisit the conversation and share it with your team. And at the end of the discussion today, there will be a short survey that appears. It only takes a moment, and your feedback genuinely helps us shape future conversations that deliver the guidance and clarity that you expect from Hub. Now, let's dive in. I am thrilled today to be joined by my colleagues and Hub experts, bringing different perspectives and lenses to our conversation today. First is Diane Stone, our Canadian Education Practice Leader, who will be walking us through deferred maintenance and facilities risk. Next is Kelly Trell, who oversees global travel risk management, who will be covering what institutions know about student and employee travel. And then Andrew Allen is our sports and NIL, known as name, image, and likeness risk management expert, and he'll be covering risk related to that area. Today, we're going to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time, so we're going to dive right in. But before we zoom in, I want to take a moment to zoom out because the context really does matter. What you're looking at is what we're calling the converging headwinds facing educational institutions right now. And the word converging is really intentional. These aren't isolated problems. They're actually 8 pressure systems that are hitting all at the same time, and in many cases, amplifying one another. If you were here for our Education Outlook discussion in 2025 or even in 2026, this framework will look really familiar to you. And that's actually the point, because the forces themselves haven't changed between political, regulatory, volatile, financial pressures, and so on. But what has changed is that the stakes across every single one of them are really starting to heighten and align. The pressure is higher, the margin for error is certainly smaller. And the decisions that institutions are making right now about coverage, risk management strategies, and where to invest, they matter a lot. And one thing I want to call out specifically under the financial headwind is social inflation, especially around the idea of third-party litigation. And although I can't dive in deep to every area, we'll certainly cover these through the lens of the conversations that we'll be having today. And this framework certainly lives inside that as well. In terms of our agenda today, the goal is today, and honestly every day, is to make sure that we're speaking to all of you, whether you are an early childhood daycare center, a K through 12 school, or even a college or university. The biggest risk concerns areas sit across property, casualty, employee benefits, retirement, private wealth, and so on and so forth. We're really hoping to cover and speak to each and every one of you, because education itself is not one thing, and risk management for educational institutions is not either. So we're hoping to cross-cut across segments, lines of coverage, and even address those things that are pertinent to both US and Canadian markets as well. So the 3 areas we're going to cover are deferred maintenance, then we'll cover travel for students and employees and faculty, and then NIL. And at the close, I'll do a broader sweep of rapid fire risk to see what else is on the radar, and also share key questions or takeaways for each decision maker in the room. So we'll leave you with something concrete that you can act on. So next and first up is Diane. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Courtney. Great to be here with everyone today. Deferred maintenance. So many of you who operate or own your own campus, this is something that some of you are very aware of, but many people are not aware of deferred maintenance until it creeps up on you. So oftentimes I talk about deferred maintenance in terms of the convergence of facilities, finance, risk, as well as advancement. So much of our time, energy, and talents on planning campuses into our long-term planning are all around the vision that we cast for our facilities, because our education programs really can't happen without the framework of a beautiful campus. And what I've often seen in working with our clients, and back when I was in the sector as the director of finance, I often saw that we were looking forward to what we were going to do in the future, often neglecting the need to maintain our campus. And so I want to, first of all, start with a definition of deferred maintenance. So the University of Toronto has a fantastic report where they report back specifically on their deferred maintenance. So I took a quote from their deferred maintenance report. It refers to deferred maintenance refers to the backlog of necessary repairs, infrastructure renewals, and equipment upgrades that have been postponed or delayed, typically due to budget, staffing, or resource constraints. So what this means is it can happen for a number of reasons. It can happen because you're focused exclusively on the annual budget. and you're not looking towards the long term, or you simply know that you have maintenance projects that should be occurring in the current year, but you just simply don't have the resources to commit to that, or the senior leadership of your institution isn't focused on maintenance and they've redeployed budget into more attractive areas of operations. Next slide, please. So let's work through an example. So an example of deferred maintenance would be in year one, there's a small deficiency. So for example, there's an estimated repair of 80,000 and it's deferred to the next budget cycle. So maybe your facilities person says a roof section, you know, we need to do it, but it's maybe not urgent. And the decision in the budget is to delay the project, but the funds aren't put aside in a reserve and it's just simply moved into the next year. And then in year three, you've deferred it now again. Now all of a sudden there's water infiltration issues, the ceiling tiles are damaged, there's insulation has been saturated. Suddenly that cost that was initially 80,000 in year one, by year three is looking at 220. But now there's even more pressure financially to be able to take on that project. So it's delayed again. And now they're putting in temporary stopgap measures, maybe patching the roof, or simply mitigating with different kinds of solutions with buckets around the campus. We've all seen it. And now next thing you know, an inspector comes in and finds mold and there's a partial school closure. Remediation costs have now skyrocketed. So by year 7, we've jumped to 1.4 and you get the picture that there's massive, by that initial delay of this $80,000 project, we've now had a 17.5 degree escalation. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm flying through this. I could talk about this for an hour, Courtney. So let's take a look at the magnitude of this problem. So Moody's ratings, they look at 500 campuses across North America, and they currently estimate there's between 750 billion and 950 billion of cost deferred. The public schools, we see a high degree of this in the public school system on both sides of the border. And independent schools, this is a really good point in the sense that there's no need to report on your financial statements what the deferred maintenance is. So your board and the stakeholders in your institution are not even going to have a lens on what the magnitude of this problem is, because they don't see it reported on the financial statements, because it's simply a massive value that's been deferred, and there's no transaction that has given rise to this valuation. The ISM, Independent Schools Management, currently commits 2 of its 9 stability markers to measuring deferred maintenance and valuation on campus. Next slide. So rapid fire. So globally, what we're looking at is for every dollar that we saved by not engaging in the required maintenance projects in a given budget cycle, they estimate there's a $4 increase in future capital renewal costs. Next slide, please, Erin. Thanks. So I'm just going to quickly go over what some of the best practices are around what you should have in place for addressing the issue of deferred maintenance. One is maintenance projections. Bring in an engineering group that can come in and make an estimation of what maintenance projects are going to be timed through. I've looked at everything from a 10 to a 30-year capital project. You can actually do attached to the projection of capital projects. You then, instead of planning for the capital projects in 1 year, you're looking forward for many years and saying, if I defer this project, it's going to bump straight into the big capital projects coming down the road. Life cycle cost modeling. So instead of looking at the building when we cut the ribbon as being, it's good, we're good to go, and we start from day one looking towards the maintenance that's going to be required on that building. And then documented backlogs, so that you're reporting into senior leadership and the board on exactly which projects have been backlogged, which ones have been deferred. And a regular cycle of property valuation. So we look at, for insurance purposes, what's our total insured value, but what we don't look at is what the value is of the deferred project. So having a look at that is critically important. And then annual reinvestment at benchmark. So what can happen is, if you're doing the appropriate reserve modeling on how much your capital reserve should be, investing those reserves to create a stream of income that also goes to defray the costs. So there's also a prioritization framework. If you find yourself in the position where you have a backlog, figuring out which projects are most top priority is critical. And also, again, I referred to it early, is annual board reporting. And with this rapid fire, I say, if you have a concern about deferred maintenance on your campus, contact your broker, and we have a risk services group that can assist with that. Was that fast enough, Courtney?
I'm really impressed. That was a lot of information that you covered in a short amount of time. Great job, Diane. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to jump in here next. Diane was really focused on campus. Now we're going to leave campus and focus on travel programs. With that, we're talking study abroad, out-of-state field trips, sports travel, volunteer trips, research travel, all of it. I do want to note on the next couple slides, I use global to be inclusive of both domestic and international. So think about it kind of in both of those realms. So first, let's kind of set the stage with the landscape that we're operating in right now. When I look at this, I kind of think in three different buckets. So what's happening right now, acute emergencies, things that suddenly arise, and chronic needs. So on the current events side, thankfully not much happening right now. Been pretty quiet in the world. No, that's not true at all, unfortunately. We've seen a lot just in the past few months. So, air traffic closures over the Middle East that kind of left travelers stranded, no clear path home in many cases. I've had multiple conversations just this week about Ebola. Last February, it was, questions around unrest in Mexico. Is it safe to send travelers there? And looking at, things like world events, the World Cup going on in North America. So that can create cost spikes, crowd dynamics, elevated crime risk, all things that programs need to be thinking about and anticipating. That next bucket is acute emergencies. So these are usually the scenarios that keep risk managers up at night. You might feel prepared to handle them, but you don't know when they're going to strike. So these are things like a sudden severe illness, significant accident, a large riot, a coup, a natural disaster, all things that typically happen in the middle of the night or over the weekend, right? So those are the kind of acute emergencies. And then chronic needs. So these are things you know about, but still managing a student's pre-existing condition abroad, whether that's a medication that requires refrigeration, scheduled infusions, severe allergies, EpiPen needs, those all take advanced planning and the right provider relationships. So, in addition to that, there's kind of the everyday risks that are there, petty crime, housing and transportation concerns, all things that can affect the traveler in a way that really can derail a program, even if it's not, a catastrophic event. So really kind of the point here is in the risk environment is not static, and you want to be thinking about all three of these kind of areas continuously. So what do we actually do with all of that? So duty of care is what kind of anchors this next slide. And duty of care is not about eliminating all risk. That's impossible. It's really about demonstrating that you have identified the risks, you've communicated those risks, and you've put in structures to, try to mitigate and respond to those risks. So on this slide are some action steps, some things that you can be doing that should be on your checklist. It's not comprehensive, but, some of the highlights here, things like making sure that you're vetting locations, accommodations, modes of transportation, people. So that could be chaperones with your group, on-site hosts, as well as activities that students will be engaging in. Making a plan for money. So, what's your cash management plan? Are you carrying a lot of cash? How can you access funds in an emergency situation? Advising travelers. So this is key for meeting that duty of care, right? So they need to be advised on location and activity specific risks, as well as, considerations of how they can support their medical needs abroad. You need to be providing that information to them. You're also ensuring that you have contingency plans. So as I mentioned on that last slide, travelers kind of unexpectedly getting stuck somewhere longer than they planned to be there. So what are those plans for travel disruptions, sheltering in place, cancellations? And then finally, making sure that you're developing and practicing emergency response protocols, not just writing them and filing them away, but that you've got them, you know how to use them, right? And then kind of finally, the last point on this slide, assistance partners can be key in helping to meet your duty of care. So most travel insurance plans embed an emergency assistance provider, but many schools directly contract with a partner. These partners are critical in helping you do some of the things mentioned in that middle box. So they can help you vet location-specific risks, transportation, housing, as well as manage traveler-specific needs, and then also respond to those emergency events that happen. So if you don't know if you have an assistance provider in place, that would be something to write down and find that out today. Who are they? How do you contact them? All right, and then on our last slide here, just thinking about some things that are operationally important. So protocols, I know I mentioned on that last slide, but you have to know where your travelers are in order to respond, right? When you see a major event happen in the world, if you don't know if you have people there, that makes a response really, really difficult. So make sure the right people have access to whatever systems you use to kind of track and store that information. Second, you're going to need current contact information. So that's for your travelers, their emergency contacts, your contacts on the ground, your insurance and assistance partners. You know, does that information live in a place that you can access it in the middle of the night, on the weekend, things like that. And then finally, practicing. So anyone at your institution who may receive a call or be part of the response needs to be included in those response protocols. You know, so even if that's, you know, an admin who might answer the call from a parent, they need to know the basics on how to respond to that, who that call needs to go to. So also the next piece is kind of looking at insurance. So knowing who's covered, what scenarios are going to trigger your policy, and just as importantly, what are the gaps? So there will be gaps, right? No policy is going to cover every possible scenario, but being aware of those gaps and how you plan to kind of account for those. Some specific things to sort of pressure test. I always like to point out the family bedside visitor benefit that's in a lot of policies. So sometimes it's a 7-day waiting period where the traveler has to be hospitalized for 7 days before that benefit kicks in. I don't know about you, but I don't know any parent that's going to wait a week before they book a flight to go see their kid who's hospitalized abroad, right? So looking at those triggers, making sure you understand how this coverage applies, when it will apply, things like security and natural disaster evacuations. There can be a need for that within your own country, right? So does that apply domestically as well as internationally? That's something to kind of look into and find out. And like Diane, I could spend an hour talking about this. You know, she didn't get an hour for deferred maintenance, so I'll wrap up the travel piece, but also looking at activity exclusions. So specifically sports and high risk activities. These are among the most common gaps that I'll see in program insurance. So, you know, if students are doing rock climbing, adventure sports, organized athletics, you need to verify if your coverage actually extends to those activities. So these are definitely conversations worth having with your broker before a program departs, not after. So hopefully this gives you a few things to kind of think about as you head into summer, some things to investigate and be prepared for. So with that, I will pass it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Kelly. That's great. Moving on to, as Kelly said, we're moving away from campus. Now I guess we're going to move to the wild, wild west of college athletics and NIL and what's going on right now in college sports. And I thought the good way to frame this is to kind of start at the 30,000 foot level and just get closer and closer to where you guys are on your individual campuses. And so holistically right now, we're 1 year into the House settlement. Where June 6th was when the House settlement was finalized, and we're starting to see now everyone got through that first period of it, and we're starting to see the challenges and the issues that are arising out of that, and how schools and schools, conferences, the NCAA as a governing body are all starting to adapt and address some of those concerns. So probably the most public and talked about are the executive orders and the government intervention, and the NCAA is spending a lot of time lobbying Congress right now. I think there are currently 7 different pieces of legislation that are at various places of the House floor. Everything from the SAFE Act, the SCORE Act, the Athlete Employment Act. You dream it up, they're discussing it in some way. I would tell you that I think that all of them have a very, very small likelihood of passing. And there is just too many different interests in everybody wants a little something out of the deal, right? The SCORE Act, which is probably has the highest likelihood of success, probably is going to fail because the Congressional Black Congress pulled their support from it because there was not enough support for HBCUs in there, effectively killing that deal. I also think that if there is a shift in who has the power at the midterm elections, the party coming into power is going to have much less interest in making this a priority than the party that is in power right now. So I think for schools and conferences that are hoping that the cavalry is going to be coming in form of executive orders or government intervention in some way, that is probably not gonna happen, and that's going to fall then to the College Sports Commission or the CSC, NIL Go. At the conference, the Big Ten, the SEC, all of the power conferences are having their annual athletic director and president's meetings actually as we speak right now, last week and this current week, and they're starting to talk about how can we take kind of jurisdiction and rule of NIL onto our plates and at a conference level. Currently, right now, some of the issues with the CSC is I think there are $150 to $160 million of deals that have not yet been approved for athletes that are either expecting that for the 26-27 seasons or have expected it for 25-26 season. And those deals could just be they weren't filed properly, they didn't meet CSC guidelines. There's a litany of reasons for why those are the way they were. But ultimately, if schools are promising athletes dollars that they are not getting, or athletes are expecting dollars that they are not getting, that is going to create legal challenges for those schools and the CSC. We've already seen an arbitration case that the CSC did win with the University of Nebraska, but that was sort of a warning shot, if you will, where I think there will be much more of those to come over the next couple months as we move into the fall sports and the 26-27 athletic year. More closer to your campus, with the transfer portal and just the freedom of athlete movement going on right now, there are a number of academic concerns that are arising. We're seeing athletes that are at 4 and 5 institutions over a 5-year period, and that is very, very hard to get acceptable credits that transfer and are working with acceptable progress, I should say, toward a degree. So schools and the academic side of campus is starting to push back a little bit, saying, well, we're kind of missing the main point here of, this is what we're trying to do with these athletes, is give them an education. And then lastly, always the 900-pound gorilla in the corner is, what are we going to do with athlete employment, and how is that going to be addressed moving forward, with things like workers' comp, athlete medical, things like that. So what are schools doing to address some of this right now? Next slide we'll talk a little bit about that. Can we flip over to okay, there we go. Sorry, it paused on my page. I apologize. So from the actual athletic department side, we are starting to see a number of schools looking at ways to protect their contracts that they are giving the athletes in terms of rev share dollars or NIL dollars against performance and injury. So if my athlete gets injured, is there any way that kind of like a disability plan that you might have for your professors or your faculty on campus? How could we maybe pass some of our salary obligations or payment obligations off to an injury plan? Medical inflation and medical spending is frankly out of control. We work as Hub with about 300 programs on their student athlete medical programs, and we are seeing some major increases just in usage of insurance, and that's becoming a major expense. So how can we get creative and think outside the box to address student athlete medical and make sure they're still getting acceptable care, but doing it in a fiscally conservative way, if you will. And then lastly, kind of the financial literacy and education piece. As the athletes do start to make more money and have money of their own, what are we doing to help these 18, 19, 20-year-old young adults become more literate financially and understand taxes? How do we set up a business? How can we do things responsibly? And so that's what we're helping with. We're seeing schools doing it. To kind of quote what Diane and Kelly said to wrap this up is, if you guys have questions about how this pertains to your specific institutions, talk to your broker, ask questions. If they can't help you, would love to have these conversations with you. But I want to pass this off to Courtney and let her bring us home here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Diane, Kelly, and Andrew. You each went into your deep topics very marvelously. And one thing I want to call back attention to, which I think is an undercurrent for the whole conversations today, and this is about duty of care, us presenting and understanding the risk and doing something about it. But I also want to make sure that we don't leave today without naming some of the other risk areas that deserve attention, because the risk landscape for educational institutions is certainly wider than any of the three areas that we covered. But before I get into the grid, I do want to acknowledge that there's a number of student-facing risk layers that we're not going to address from what you see here, although we did cover two, namely with travel risk and NIL. But there's also something else that's kind of resonating with the field, with students losing affordable access to health insurance and Medicare due to some legislative changes. So for many institutions, it's not just an abstract story, it's kind of showing up real time for students. So not going to dive into that. What you do see here is the opportunity for us to talk very briefly about risk under property and casualty, employee benefits, and retirement and private wealth. So I'm going to spend a few seconds on each of these, starting with active assailant, which may be top of mind across every segment of education, because it's no longer really a question about is there a need for an insurance risk program. It's whether it's been tested, if it's current, and if things are adequately covered as well. Similarly with abuse and molestation, this universally cuts across as a risk for early childhood, K through 12, and higher ed. But legislative activities are really changing in multiple states, expanding reporting and training obligations and extending statutes. So the liability climate here is increasing and not decreasing. And AI and digital compliance, the governance gaps as we adapt tools for policy frameworks, it's hard to keep up with, keeping in mind also ADA obligations as well. And the third party risk is huge. Just last month, Canvas experienced a breach that impacted a large number of educational institutions. Switching over to the middle framework here about employee benefits, workforce reduction liability as budgetary pressures really drive staffing changes across the board. So we can see reduction in force, restructuring, layoffs, really increasing not only the risk framework across all lines of coverage. Then you add an increased pressure due to benefits costs with healthcare inflation. It's really driving a need to have more concrete conversation around benefit design, not just as a strategy for renewal conversation. And this human capital undercurrent about retention and the need to attract and retain talent really is key for all segments. On the retirement and private wealth, the federal loan policy shifts with the elimination of Grad Plus and Parent Plus in the US. It's not just a financial aid story. It's really about strategic alignment with enrollment and the downstream budget implication that boards need to have right now. And on the retirement front, especially in the US, the fiduciary exposures continue to increase with litigation activities. So practices are coming top in mind with those changes. And I think really syncing this all together is the institutional financial distress. And it's hard to say this out loud because it's real. Closures, mergers, and financial stress are happening across all sectors at an increasing pace. So 9 risks, about 30 seconds each. That's what's on the radar. On the next slide, I won't spend too much time because this will be a great takeaway for you. But this is really about hitting home something for each person who may be on the line, regardless of what your role is. And this is a simple framework. What questions should you be asking yourself? And really, what would this unlock for your institutions? Whether you're on the board or a trustee, you're responsible for the financial obligations for an institution, or the human resources or risk manager, or handling the student affairs. We hope this question resonates with you and kind of an appreciation of what this unlocks for your institution as well. And certainly we are here to be a supporter with these 5 roles and these 5 questions. And hopefully we can help position you to have a better outcome. So we said this was going to be a rapid fire, and we talked about and covered a lot today. And we certainly thank you all for joining us. And hopefully you found that we've touched on something for every single segment across every single line of coverage, whether you're in the US or Canada. And so as we bring this to conclusion, I want to remind you again that we will be sharing the recording and additional resources will be available to you. But before we go, please do take a moment to complete that survey at the end. And I want to thank my colleagues for bringing this thoughtful, timely, and quick content to you. So thank you, Diane, Kelly, and Andrew. We are here to be a resource with you. And I know we share that same sentiment with all of our other education practice leaders. So we look forward to having these discussions again in the future. But thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.